I signed a rule that looked like care and felt like control. I kept it close, like a blade hidden in velvet. The bathroom fan hummed like a distant storm over tile. Cold light sliced the counter and made my skin look foreign. The house felt calm in a way that pressed on ribs. Mint lingered on my tongue with a faint metallic sting. His mother greeted me once under a glassy spring sky. Warm smile, cool eyes, and a quiet focus on bloodline. She loved words like legacy and duty wrapped as kindness. Lemon oil and old photographs carried a scent of plans. A cream folder slid across wood with slow intention. My skin prickled before I even read the first line. No mention of pregnancy anywhere, including work and home. No baby items visible in shared rooms at any time. No visitors, until an approved date for wellness reasons. The language wore velvet gloves and sharpened nails. I read it twice and felt a key turn. I could not see the door, but I heard the click. I told myself calm would help my body rest. I told myself rules could pass like a short season. The living room gleamed, spare and obedient to invisible hands. The television held my faint reflection like a warning. I signed with a pen that felt heavier than ink. The signature settled like a stone at the bottom. A wellness coach arrived in spotless sneakers and gentle phrasing. Her schedule carved the day into obedient little boxes. Breathe here, walk there, and journal in 5 exact lines. Structure sat on my chest like a folded blanket of lead. A marriage addendum followed with careful, polished terms. Harmony linked to compliance, and quiet linked to well-being. Temporary guardianship decisions drifted toward his mother with precision. Disruption gained definitions that turned life into a ledger. My mouth tasted copper as I traced each clause. My heart knocked once, twice, then held a steady drum. I agreed on paper, but I did not surrender. I chose to follow every line with surgical calm. The next morning I measured oatmeal by level scoops. The spoon rang softly, then the room swallowed the sound. I did not mention the baby in any form. I placed nothing bright or small on any shelf. The purifier hummed a steady green heartbeat near the window. The air felt filtered and thin, like thoughts under glass. A mail slot snapped and my shoulders tightened fast. My body kept score before my mind caught up. The purifier's tone shifted with a new low thread. My neck prickled while my eyes stayed still. Dust traced a clean ring along the back grille. The circle broke in a way that did not match use. I started a plain notebook with block letters and times. I logged sounds, rooms, sensations, and changes without comment. The log built a dock under my feet, firm. I felt the boards rise to meet my weight. By noon, the living room looked too perfect to touch. Perfection felt brittle, like sugar glass over a flame. Control invites collapse. I kept that sentence in my chest. I saved it like a match in a dark pocket. I will honor the rule and expose what it hides. I will take back the air inside this house. If you have lived under a quiet weight, you know. Peace becomes a script that expects your steady voice. I will fold each page until the seams weaken. The paper will tear on a day that I choose. The house liked order, and order liked secrets. I learned to hear the difference. I kept the notebook near the coffee tin, plain and closed. The cardboard felt warm from the morning light. The pages smelled like pulp and promise. The purifier hummed with that new low thread again. My skin prickled along the base of my skull. Something else, thin and patient. I wrote the time and the note without emotion. Calm hands, cold mind. I would let the pattern reveal itself. A package arrived without a return address. The paper was smooth and over-taped. The scissors made a soft, final sound through the seam. Inside, a second schedule waited with brighter fonts. The wellness coach called it an enhanced routine in her cheery note. The plan carved deeper grooves through my day. Breathe, walk, hydrate, journal. Lower my voice after 6 in the evening. Avoid stimulating topics after 8. My chest tightened like a lid turning too far. I slid the plan under the first plan and logged the change. I moved room to room with quiet feet. The office smelled like dust and lemon oil. The vents wore neat gray rims, undisturbed and even. One vent near the window had a fresh scuff at the screw. The mark was bright, like a scratch on new paint. I felt heat rise under my collarbone, slow and steady. I wrote the time. I wrote the location. I did not write the name in my head. I kept the name inside my teeth like a coin. An evaluation letter arrived on cream paper with gentle edges. The seal looked medical and important. The appointment sat in the center like a stone. The letter promised support for maternal mental clarity. The letter used soft words to steer hard outcomes. I knew the building on the letterhead. The building hid inside the company campus. The hallways there smelled like fresh carpet and policy. I pictured a clipboard with pre-printed boxes. I pictured tidy check marks that shaped my future without my voice. I ate slow that night and felt oatmeal turn heavy. The spoon clicked like a metronome against the bowl. My shoulders stayed high and would not drop. I closed my eyes and heard the purifier cut the room into bands. The bands stacked like glass panes in my head. I needed a new layer of proof that belonged to me. I placed a small fetal heart monitor on my belly and listened. The sound came like a tiny horse over soft ground. I kept my breath slow, and even so the rhythm would stay clear. I logged the time and the position. The device marked each minute with a faint chime. The chime sank into my bones and steadied my hands. I let the audio record while I rested, eyes open to the dark. Metal moved in the distance with a careful touch. A sequence of light taps followed, spaced and precise. 4 quick, 2 slow, and 3 quick again. The pattern repeated with a small pause in between. I knew the shape without seeing the keypad. The numbers made a fingerprint that did not lie. I tasted copper and kept my body still. The recorder kept listening with its small, faithful ear. I let the pattern run twice more, then pressed stop. Morning came pale and sharp. The air smelled like coffee and detergent. I opened the notebook and wrote the coded rhythm in clumsy dashes. I added the time, the room, and my pulse rate. I wrote a single sentence under the line. The safe opens when the house thinks I sleep. I waited until the afternoon sun moved off the office door. The knob felt cool and clean against my palm. The safe sat low and square behind a stack of binders. Dust outlined everything except the keypad. The metal face looked slightly brighter than the rest. My stomach tightened, and my mouth went dry. I listened for the purifier's hum in the next room. The pitch held steady, like a curtain drawn and tied. I entered the rhythm from the night before. The beeps sounded calm and clinical. The light turned green with a polite little blink. The lock released with a small breath, almost kind. Inside, documents lay flat under a weighted clip. The top page smelled like toner and intent. The title used the language of temporary guardianship. The margins carried neat notes in a familiar hand. Dates, names, contingencies, phrases about disruption and measured compliance. The draft had signatures missing and arrows pointing to where they belonged. My vision narrowed, and sound rushed like wind in a tunnel. I told my body to slow down 1 notch at a time. I counted 4 breaths and placed each page back in order. I traced the paper edges with a steady finger to hide any ripple. I closed the safe and wiped a faint touch from the metal edge. The room felt too quiet for a beat. Then the house exhaled again. I returned to the kitchen and opened the notebook. The pen moved like a needle pulling thread through cloth. I copied the title, the key phrases, and the date on each footer. I drew a small square beside every item that needed proof. I would not chase emotion. I would build a chain. The evaluation day arrived with scripted calm. The campus lobby smelled like citrus cleaner and new plastic. The front desk smile held just the right amount of warmth. I sat in a chair that felt engineered to be inoffensive. A wall screen looped a video about resilience and community. The hallways had no echoes. Sound died in the carpet almost at once. I checked in and felt eyes glance up without interest. The room measured how I sat, how I blinked, and how I breathed. The evaluator spoke through practiced cadence, though I only heard shapes. I answered in full sentences, precise and neutral. I fielded questions about mood regulation, social supports, and stress tolerance. I noted every leading phrase in my mind and paired it with time. I described daily structure without revealing the structure that held me down. I gave nothing that could be twisted, and everything that could be verified. My pulse stayed even, steady at the throat. The chair did not creak. The clock did not tick. The room felt soundproofed against surprise. I left with a stamped card and a brochure about balance. The brochure smelled like ink and lavender. The parking lot radiated heat through rising waves. I sat in the car with the recorder in my pocket and listened to silence. My hands shook once, then stopped. A gust of wind pushed grit against the windshield with a dry hiss. I wrote a line on the back of the brochure. The test measured my obedience, not my health. That night, I played the audio pattern again, low and careful. The numbers mapped to letters in a way that meant nothing. I only needed the rhythm, the proof of habit, the clock on the wall. The purifier hummed with that patient undertone, present and unbothered. I stood near it and felt the hair rise on my arms. The clean ring at the back grille still had that broken seam, fresh, precise, and wrong. I looked at the ceiling and saw the faintest ripple in paint. A small line curved over the office doorway, pale and new. The shape matched the path of a cable pulled once and eased back. The detail sat where no one would scan unless they wished to know. I wrote the time and the place, and a single word: conduit. I slept in short pieces and woke with the first bird call. The morning tasted like dust, coffee, and a thin line of resolve. The notebook waited, square and calm on the counter. I slid the recorder beside it and pressed my palm flat on both. My hand warmed the surfaces until the chill left. I felt the dock under my feet again, plank by plank. If care is real, why must it hide behind devices and scripts? If safety is honest, why does it need a safe full of plans? If you were me, would you keep warning people who profit from your compliance? Or would you collect quiet proof until it speaks louder than any plea? I chose the second path and did not look back. The house kept humming, patient as ever. The schedule tightened its loops by inches, not feet. The addendum waited in a drawer like a clean blade. I moved through each day with small steps and wider eyes. The pattern was almost complete. One more proof would seal the chain. I shifted from suspicion to design. I made obedience my instrument and shield. I followed the schedule with near mechanical precision. I logged each block without color. I turned my phone to airplane mode at 6 each evening. I placed the device flat on the counter at 8. I drank from the same glass at the same hour. I moved through the house at measured speed. Each tiny ritual built a metronome inside my chest. Order grew dense enough to measure. Order made deviations glow. The purifier kept its calm green light. The undertone held steady, low and patient. I stood beside it each night, counting microscopic swells. The motor pitched up at voices. The motor relaxed when I mouthed words without sound. I logged both results with neat strokes, no commentary. I needed one clean trigger that proved surveillance. I chose an invented symptom, specific and odd. I spoke about it once, alone, near the purifier. My voice stayed even and clinical. I moved on as if nothing shifted. 2 days later, an adjustment appeared in my regimen. The wellness coach added a new line to my evening rules. The line targeted the invented symptom with cheerful certainty. The purifier hummed like a satisfied witness. The test produced a sharp relief inside my bones. I had correlation and a plausible mechanism. I wrote one word in the notebook with dark ink. Confirmed. I added a square next to the word and checked it. Then I let the page breathe in the open air. Paper has a way of steadying breath when truth lands. I expanded the grid that tracked sound, routine, and response. I also added a column called leverage. I filled it slowly, without heat. Leverage grew from patterns, not from impulse. Leverage could wait until it mattered. The safe returned to me in dreams like a small iron animal. I kept my hands away during daylight. I did not need another direct opening. I needed an independent chain that lived outside that metal box. I began with health records that did not belong to me. Insurance mail arrived under both names, bundled and bland. The envelopes looked identical, but the weight differed slightly. One envelope felt stiff, as if something extra hid within. I slid a knife along the fold with a single quiet pull. Inside, a routine benefits summary carried a minor anomaly. A specialist code applied to a premarital month. The clinic name sat innocently in the corner, almost shy. I recognized the specialty without effort. Urology. My breath shortened for 3 steps, then steadied. I scanned the dates and cross-checked them with my old calendar. That month held a trip I remembered well. I had traveled for a work seminar in another state. He had stayed home and claimed a deadline stretch. My ribs felt tight, as if a belt cinched 2 notches. I did not assume. I requested my own download of plan utilization. The portal spat out lines of blue text and dates. Buried near the bottom, the clinic name appeared 3 times. Consultation, procedure, follow-up. The copay entries told a simple story. The claim notes confirmed elective status, no complications. The room tilted very slightly as if a ship crested a low swell. My jaw ached where I had clenched without noticing. A taste like iron spread under my tongue and faded. I wrote the 3 entries into the notebook with careful spacing. I watched the words sit on the page and cool. Then I added a second column. Motive. I did not tell a soul. I breathed through the surge and felt it flatten. The finding did not prove everything. It did narrow the map of possible truths. It also cast a bright light on the performance of concern. If care were the goal, honesty would have existed. Secrecy meant something else entirely. I drove to the clinic parking lot and sat in the shade. The air smelled like hot asphalt and cut grass. A delivery truck hissed and settled near the loading lane. I looked at the building without moving closer. I did not need faces or a signature. I needed only the clean weight of corroboration. The portal gave that to me already. The parking lot visit gave me a physical anchor. Sometimes the body requires an address for anger, even if the mind refuses display. At home, the Purifier smiled with its little green light. The undertone vibrated like a quiet wire in a wall. I stared at the faceplate and waited for nothing to happen. Nothing obliged me, steady and calm. I placed a small sticker on the back grille, low and off-center. The sticker had a hair-thin foil embedded in the paper. If the grille moved, the foil would crease and flash. I logged the placement in 2 lines and closed the notebook. I made dinner with steady hands and neutral breath. Garlic hissed in the pan and sweetened the air. Water rolled into a slow boil with a low, heavy sound. I measured spices by feel and by memory. I placed plates with deliberate care, equidistant from the edge. The room looked like a catalog spread. The table felt like a stage set after the audience left. Later, I set the heart monitor and listened for the small gallop. Warmth spread under my palm with each soft thud. The device chimed on the minute as before. I let the recorder pick up room tone and distant pipes. A pattern turned steady in my head like a tide clock. I felt the railing of the dock at my back again. Near midnight, the house shifted on its foundation the way houses do. Wood sighed, air moved, and appliances reset. Then the sequence began. 4 quick taps, 2 slow taps, 3 quick taps. The safe announced itself to ears that had learned its language. I let the recorder do its work and said nothing. I sank into the mattress and opened my hands. Silence came back after longer than last time. In the morning, the sticker behind the grill had a new crease. The foil line caught a slice of sunlight and winked. I took a photograph with no flash and no reflection. I printed the image on plain paper at the corner store. The paper felt warm and plasticky, still damp at the edges. I marked the date and time in small letters along the margin. The margin looked clean enough to frame. I needed a human witness who did not owe me anything. I scheduled a service call for routine filter replacement. The technician arrived with a toolbox and a practiced gait. I kept my voice neutral and my hands loosely folded. I watched him tilt the purifier and study the back panel. He paused for a fraction before schooling his face. He swapped the filter, closed the housing, and wrote notes. He left behind a small sticker with the company logo and date. I placed that sticker in the notebook, on the leverage page. The new schedule from the coach tightened again by 1/2 inch. The bedtime protocol extended with a section on stimulus control. I read it slowly and felt my pulse settle into low thunder. The invented symptom still anchored the added rule. Patterns cannot resist expressing themselves when they feel safe. I walked past the office and paused at the door jamb. A pale smear curved above the frame, faint and new. Paint dust gathered at the baseboard where none had gathered before. The curve matched a cable path eased and resettled. I pressed a fingertip to the dust and lifted a gray crescent. I set the crescent on the notebook like a tiny moon. I built a bundle for later, neat and quiet. Audio logs with timestamps, photographs of the grill crease, insurance portal downloads with claim codes, a technician sticker with service date, a schedule revision that matched my decoy confession, a note about the specialist clinic and the premarital timeline. The bundle went into a folder with no label. The folder slid into a drawer I rarely used. I stood at the window and watched wind lift the treetops. Leaves showed their pale undersides and flashed like coins. A sharp scent of ozone rode the air before any storm. The sky carried that particular tension that holds and holds. I breathed in and counted to 4. I breathed out and counted to 6. My breath drew an even stripe across the inside of my chest. If control builds palaces, why do those palaces hide microphones? If love claims protection, why does it depend on scripts and punishments? If bloodline matters so deeply, why erase the science that defines it? If you were me, would you still ask for gentle course corrections? Or would you diagram the system and set the stage for collapse? I chose the second question and decided to answer it with action. I would obey until the system contradicted itself in public. I would move pieces into place that looked like kindness. I would let the mask lower itself out of habit and pride. I would be calm while the loop tightened around its own throat. I circled a date on the calendar in pencil, small and light. A gala loomed on the company board, burnished and careful. The family had a plan for prestige and reputation. I had a plan for truth, sequence, and jurisdiction. The house hummed, unbothered by what approached. The rule glowed like frost in weak sunlight. The frost would look beautiful until the first real heat. The gala approached like a tide that refused to turn. I let it rise around me without struggle. The venue gleamed with glass, metal, and borrowed light. My heels clicked on stone like a metronome for poise. Air smelled like citrus, starch, and faint ozone from screens. Strings warmed the lobby, sweet and practiced, never too loud. I kept my shoulders low and my chin steady. A wristband hugged my pulse with a soft tug. I noted exits, cameras, and sightlines without moving my eyes. Prestige gathered in clusters that shone like small planets. Laughter rose and fell in perfectly behaved waves. A banner promised wellness, community, and maternal support. The words curled like ribbon and hid the knots beneath. I felt the monitor in my bag, silent and ready. My breath moved slow, even, and invisible. If care is honest, why does it require a stage? If truth is simple, why does it need this much lighting? I blended into a row near the back of the hall. Velvet seats faced a podium with a generous smile. Stage crews whispered in headsets that glinted like beetle shells. A sponsor reel drifted across a massive screen. The first name glowed with family pride and corporate polish. The second name sat under it like a perfect shadow. The scholarship title mirrored a legacy that loved its own echo. I checked the time and pressed a slim recorder in my pocket. The device answered with a mute vibration against my palm. The light softened as if the room inhaled at once. The air tasted like cold water, clean and empty. I closed my eyes for a beat and pictured the dock. Planks, nails, rope. My feet remembered the weight and the grain. The program moved in polite chapters with warm applause. Speeches offered resilience and structure in measured phrases. The crowd absorbed comfort like a dry field drinks rain. I studied the edges, not the center. Edges are where fabric begins to fray. Volunteers set a stack of packets on every table. The paper smelled like toner, glue, and fresh ambition. I slid my packet open with one finger along the fold. Pages nested inside with tabs and color blocks. My eye caught a misplaced file name in faint gray. Attachment _4 retained an internal title that should not travel. I felt a small heat bloom under my breastbone. I turned the page as if nothing asked to be seen. An internal memo hid between donor bios and a photo spread. The memo described a response plan to maternal distress incidents. The plan mapped messaging pathways and dedicated liaisons. A line item named a private evaluator group on company grounds. A second line referenced prearranged guardianship guidance. The wording sanded the teeth off every sharp idea. The teeth still showed through in the right light. I slid my hand under the tablecloth and tapped the recorder. The microphone listened while the gala praised protection. I logged the page number with a dot of pencil near the seam. The dot hid like a freckle on pale skin. My pulse steadied, my mind cooled by 2 degrees. A storm line gathered beyond the tall windows. Dark poured across the horizon like ink in water. The glass trembled once, polite and quick. The orchestra adjusted and lifted their brightness a notch. I watched a sponsor badge tilt at a careless angle. The badge revealed a name that tied 2 departments together. The connection had lived in whispers. Now it lived on a lanyard. If the system is clean, why do its seams shed lint? If the plan is for good, why hide the hands that hold it? A hush drew across the room as a keynote began. The speech braided family, duty, and public trust. Phrases struck the air with polished weight, then softened. My recorder listened past the applause to the side comments. Chairs creaked, programs rustled, and pens clicked. A single sentence drifted from the wings in an unguarded tone. The sentence included the word optics and the word compliant. It landed like a moth on a lit pane and burned its wings. Lightning stitched the sky without thunder at first. The second flash brought sound that pressed into ribs. The glass hummingbird sculpture on the stage vibrated for a heartbeat. The room held steady, trained and stubborn, and carried on. A coordinator moved silently to adjust the teleprompter. The power flickered once, then returned with a minor shiver. My skin tingled with that particular pre-storm electricity. A tray of envelopes moved down the aisle for pledges. I took one and felt weight that did not match paper. A small drive rested in a slit at the back flap. The label bore the scholarship logo and a date. The packet designer loved clever details and tactile surprises. The drive wore a harmless smile in corporate colors. I slid it into my bag, as if I had always planned it. The storm broke open with a long, disciplined roar. The lights dimmed, rose, and then settled low. Emergency strips along the floor lit in soft blue. The sound system crackled and then softened to local power. The orchestra ended a bar in an odd key and held. The room exhaled together, a chorus of careful relief. Staff announced a short pause for safety checks. No one panicked. Prestige rarely does. I walked to the lobby with slow steps and loose shoulders. The lobby carried the smell of wet stone and warm bodies. The storm hit the glass with coin-bright spatters. Rain traced racing paths like ink sketching frantic vines. I moved to a quiet display case and faced my reflection. My face looked steady, but my eyes held the line. I opened my bag and checked the monitor with one thumb. Record. Battery. Time. Everything held. I slid the small drive into the side pocket. Paper packets waited neatly for the next segment. A volunteer asked if I needed directions with a kind tilt. I nodded once and let my feet carry me back to the aisle. The keynote resumed under a calmer hum. The storm became a steady drum behind the careful words. I let the sound sync with my breathing until both felt owned. The program closed with a photo call and glossy smiles. The room brightened to a level that flattered every skin tone. People moved toward catered corners and small talk. The scent of rosemary and butter drifted like a gentle trap. I stopped near a corporate display that featured the scholarship. A looping video ran with perfect captions and soft colors. A spotlight warmed the banner with a patient glow. A staffer adjusted a tablet stand with exacting care. The cable under the stand pulled 3 millimeters too far. The stand wobbled and knocked a folder from the shelf. Paper fanned across the carpet like pale fish. I knelt and helped gather pages with neutral hands. The staffer thanked me with a smile that pressed too hard. I passed her a stack and kept one page that matched my memo. The page referenced media liaisons and a crisis drill. The drill scenario named a mother as agitator for public sympathy. The word agitator sat inside quotation marks as if it needed a costume. The page entered my bag without changing its heartbeat. If dignity is the goal, why rehearse a mother as a threat? If wellness is the aim, why design a drill for silence? I stepped outside under the awning when the rain thinned. The night tasted metallic and sweet, like pennies and rainwater. Sirens wove far away and folded into the storm. I called a rideshare and waited in the clean blue light. My body hummed with a quiet tremor that did not show. I pressed my palm over my bag and felt the shape of what I carried. The car smelled like fabric softener and cold vinyl. Water traced slow tears down the windows. Street lamps smeared into bright ovals across the glass. I swallowed and let my shoulders fall 1 inch. The driver kept the radio low and the heater faint. I replayed the memo in my head with precise pacing. Words arranged themselves into a chain of soft clicking links. At home, the house greeted me with its careful calm. The Purifier glowed green and sang under its breath. The sticker behind the grill lifted at one edge, very slight. The foil crease caught a sliver of moonlight and blinked. I placed the bag on the counter and wiped a ring of rain. My heart beat at the base of my throat, steady and hard. I spread the items in a private grid and checked each piece. Memo, drill page, drive. Recorder. Timestamp. Wristband with the gala date in microprint. I photographed the set and then each item alone. I wrote a list with block letters and boxed each line. Leverage, integrity, and timing shared the same row. Thunder softened to a deep purr behind the walls. The refrigerator cycled and settled with a quiet click. The house smelled like wet wool, garlic, and paper ink. I felt both very small and very exact, like a needle. I placed the drive in a sealed envelope and dated the flap. I placed the memo pages under a plain book and pressed. I copied the recorded file to 2 cards and labeled both. My phone lit with a flood advisory and an emergency banner. The message tone reverberated in the calm kitchen. I looked at the clock and at the compact stack on the counter. The stack looked unremarkable and complete. I felt a line draw across the inside of my ribs. On one side lived gathering. On the other side lived action. If a mask lowers on its own, do you lift it faster? If a loop tightens around its neck, do you pull or pause? If you were me, would you shout at a bright room and watch it blink? Or would you let the room talk to itself until every microphone overheats? I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway. The green circle on the Purifier looked gentle and sure. The undertone vibrated with that familiar patient note. I could almost hear the system congratulate itself for order. The compliment echoed into an empty place where it belonged. I went to bed with the monitor on the nightstand. The device pulsed the smallest glow across my knuckles. The storm faded to a kind of ocean without shore. My breath slowed into even measures and held. The plan had its stage, its audience, and its script. My proof had its chain, its anchor, and its time. The night carried me forward like a river with a clear mouth. The river believed it carved the valley all by itself. The valley knew the glacier had already done the work. The storm arrived like a verdict that did not need words. Wind pressed the windows until the frames groaned. Sirens stitched the night into thin, bright seams. Power dipped, rose, and then chose a lower hum. The house exhaled warm air with a tired sound. My belly clenched in a way that meant movement. I felt heat rise under my skin and settle. I checked the monitor and saw a steady green. I placed it in my bag with the recorder and the drive. Water ran in silver sheets down the street. Streetlights wore trembling halos like shaken crowns. Tires hissed on blacktop with a relentless whisper. My rideshare canceled with a polite notification. Then another. I counted my breath and called for emergency transport. The dispatcher spoke in measured units that landed like steps. I held the phone flat against my palm until the line ended. Blue light washed the walls before the siren reached my ribs. The stretcher wheels rattled with a metallic stutter on stone. Rubber soles squeaked and faded across the entryway. The air smelled like wet nylon and sanitizer. I felt the house behind me watch me leave without comment. The Purifier glowed a final calm green and held its breath. The ambulance roof thrummed like a heart against rain. The medic secured straps with quick, efficient pulls. A monitor beeped with cool patience near my shoulder. The sound counted without passion, and I welcomed it. I stared at a metal cabinet and saw my reflection bend. I thought of the dock and saw wooden planks in the curve. We rerouted to a secondary facility with backup power. Flooded roads drew bright slashes across the map. The driver spoke into a radio in short, calm bursts. The vehicle swayed and steadied like a boat in a lock. I closed my eyes and rode the rhythm like a tide. My body chose a path and refused to be argued with. The temporary ward smelled like plastic, heat, and bleach. Lights buzzed with a faint, high note above speech. Wheels clicked across seams in the floor at even intervals. I felt the bed shift under me and lock with a soft thump. A nurse checked lines and measures with silent expertise. Her hands moved fast without any performative softness. I felt my spine relax 1 degree under her competence. The storm hit the roof with a new ferocity. The building answered with a low, steady growl. I registered voice shapes and shoe prints and clipped instructions. I matched each sensation with a breath and a number. The method created a path through noise and fear. The path did not promise comfort, but it promised direction. Time folded into a thin cord and pulled me forward. Pain arrived in clear waves with cold edges. I gripped the rail and focused on a point in the wall. The point sat at the center of a small paint swirl. I let the swirl hold my eyes while my body worked. The room narrowed and then widened like an aperture. The field changed from grainy to sharp and back again. The moment came like a bell without a sound. The weight left, and the air entered different. Cold brushed my skin, then warmth replaced it. The monitors shifted to a calmer rhythm that soothed the ribs. My hands loosened without my permission. My jaw unclenched and found its shape again. A tiny cry cut the air and hung like a bright thread. Relief drenched me from scalp to heel in one clean sweep. I felt hollowed and filled at once, impossible and true. I counted my breaths and matched them to the monitor. I touched the sheet and felt the texture as proof. My eyes stung and cleared and stung again. The ward returned to its steady drum. The storm softened to a low, endless rinse. The lights held. The power held. The chain inside my bag held as well. I pictured the memo and the drive and the sticker crease. I pictured the safe's polite breath as it released its plan. I pictured the calendar date I circled, small and light. He did not reach the facility that night. Road closures redirected private vehicles without mercy. Security rules closed access to only essential staff. The system that loved optics met a rule it could not style. The thought brought no glee, only clean space to think. I used the space to anchor what came next. Morning arrived gray and new like a bandage. The building smelled like coffee, gauze, and rain. A cart creaked past and left a trail of warm air. I checked my device and confirmed the recorder file. The timestamps aligned with the storm reports exactly. The ambulance log made a neat column of minutes and miles. The data sat with a quiet dignity that required nothing. I asked for lactation support and a social worker. I requested both with full sentences and steady tone. I spoke about home routines and recent stressors with precision. I listed devices in the house that monitored air quality. I mentioned the wellness schedules and the corporate evaluator. I offered no conclusions. I offered only verifiable lines. The social worker listened like an anchor listens to current. She tracked details without adding weight to my words. She took notes in clean strokes that matched her eyes. She requested permission to copy my timestamps for later. I granted it with a nod and an open hand. Paper moved from me to her and became institutional memory. I called my attorney's office when the ward quieted. My voice held even through the residues of pain. I stated facts as if I were reading a shipping manifest: gala date, memo page, drive, recorder, sticker crease, technician sticker, insurance portal codes with descriptions, premarital procedure timeline under elective status, the plan of guardianship that waited in a safe, the addendum that linked harmony to compliance and control. The reply came in segments like careful cargo being loaded, recommendations, preservation steps, chain of custody, facility policies. I wrote each item in my notebook with block letters. I felt a calm like a wide river under the words. The calm had no warmth, but it had depth and speed. A message arrived that he had come to the building. The storm had eased enough to open outer doors. I watched the nurse station field calls with crisp speed. Policy-shaped access with rules that felt clean and sharp. The rules used safety as structure, not as theater. My chest softened at that difference like ice in warm water. I requested a printed visitor log and my own chart access. The clerk provided both with polite efficiency and stamps. Date, time, purpose, staff initials. The lines made a quiet fence around the ward. The fence existed for everyone, not for me alone. Order that served health felt like real air after days of glass. I slept in short pieces that tasted like copper and salt. I woke, fed, and slept like a machine tuned for care. The storm moved east on the weather map and thinned. The city returned to its normal, indifferent pulse. I pressed my palm to the device bag and felt the shape. I let myself imagine the next room, the next step, the next day. Discharge required more signatures than arrival. Paper touched paper in a soft, precise shuffle. A bracelet left a faint mark around my wrist. The mark looked like a pale echo of a closed loop. I chose to see it as temporary and true. At home, the air felt staged again, but duller. The purifier held its green light like a tired actor. The undertone continued to vibrate, patient and smug. The sticker crease flashed once in the afternoon sun. The office door jamb carried that same faint curve of paint. The drawer with the addendum waited like a clean blade. I fed, logged, and moved quietly through rooms. I matched every task with 2 deep breaths. I kept my feet warm and my mind cold. The house could not force heat or hurry into me. I set the folder on the table and built a grid. Top left to bottom right, clean lines and small boxes. Evidence, date, source, verification, chain. I placed the drive in a padded envelope and labeled it. I placed a copy of the memo with highlighted lines. I added photographs with printed timestamps in the corner. I added the technician sticker with the company logo. I added the schedule revision that matched my decoy symptom. I added the insurance portal printouts with claim codes. I added the safe plan details written in neutral terms. I wrote the ambulance run number and the facility note about access. I sealed the envelope and signed across the flap. The doorbell rang with a polite chime that cut the air. My skin prickled the way it had near the Purifier grill. I looked through the viewer and saw polished shoes and neat fabric. I opened the door and kept my spine tall and straight. A stack of documents presented itself like a tray. Service of intent regarding custody and interim directives. The language wore gray suits and hated sunlight. I received the stack without flinch. I thanked the messenger and closed the door softly. I placed the papers on the table and let them cool. I felt anger rise like a fast tide and then level. The timing was perfect in a way that felt clumsy. The storm had given the system a test it had failed. The system now reached for the script it knew. I called my attorney and stated receipt, time, and description. I photographed each page and numbered the files. I emailed only the index and held the images for hand delivery. I secured the originals in a folder that matched the first. The two folders sat side by side like matched stones. One folder held the story the house had told. One folder held the story the house wanted to tell. Afternoon light slid across the table and warmed the paper edges. Dust danced in the beam like fine ash in slow water. The Purifier hummed and wore its green ring like a crown. I felt my breath deepen and my shoulders relax one notch. The line inside my ribs shifted from gathering to action. I placed the infant monitor beside the folders and watched the light. The tiny glow pulsed with a soft, stubborn rhythm. The rhythm did not ask for permission to exist. The rhythm did not bend to schedules or optics. It stated a fact with every beat and move. That fact had more gravity than any plan in a safe. I wrote one sentence at the top of a blank page. Control met weather and lost. Then I wrote the next sentence. Secrecy met timestamps and lost. I wrote a third sentence without lifting my pen. Surveillance met an engineer and left fingerprints. The 3 lines aligned like stars that sailors trust. If a system must hide to function, it fears daylight. If a family must script compassion, it does not know love. If legacy requires silence, it is only costume and weight. If you were me, would you plead with an engine that runs on control? Or would you pull the cord that stops the show and call the audience to witness? I chose the second action and set the time. I arranged handoffs for copies and originals. I scheduled a visit for a sworn statement and retention. I requested a technician affidavit on device anomalies. I requested a facility statement on visitor restrictions by storm. I requested the ambulance log to be certified and sealed. Each request went out with a receipt and a timestamp. Dusk arrived with a clean blue chill. The house dimmed into its careful evening pose. The Purifier hummed and waited for me to forget. I did not forget. I checked the sticker crease again and smiled once. The smile felt like a hinge oiled after a long season. I placed both folders inside a plain canvas bag. I tied the handles with a neat square knot. The knot sat in my palm with a small, solid weight. My pulse slowed and matched the glow of the monitor. The night stretched out with a clear, unbroken line. The plan no longer felt like a thought experiment. The plan stood upright and wore its own bones. The next day would belong to documents, signatures, and rooms with seals. The day after would belong to consequences that chose their own speed. I stood very still and listened to the house sing order. The song did not know it had already changed keys. I woke to a sky the color of tin. The air tasted like old coins. The canvas bag sat by the door, square and patient. My hand found the knot and felt its clean weight. The house hummed in that familiar low band. The Purifier shone with a soft, false halo. I moved through the kitchen with steady steps. Paper whispered under my palm like dry leaves. My breath made thin clouds in the morning chill. The door clicked shut with a small final tone. The courthouse smelled like stone, ink, and coffee. Elevators sighed and reflected faces into dull chrome. Floors rang with measured shoes and nervous steps. The hallway swallowed voices and gave back nothing. My attorney met me with a file that felt heavy. We walked without speaking, aligned in spine and pace. The hearing room held a long table in still air. A clock ticked with a polite, relentless sound. I placed the bag down and sat straight. My fingers cooled against varnished wood. The light above me hummed like a caged insect. The room felt engineered to strip performance away. Pages began to change hands in quiet sequence. The court accepted exhibits and logged every line. Timestamp, source, verification chain, custody of media. I watched the clerk draw fences with careful ink. I described the schedule that turned life into loops. I described the wellness coach and the added rules. I described the invented symptom and the precise response. I described the Purifier tone that carried a patient thread. I named the sticker crease behind the grill. I named the service visit and the technician sticker. I named the audio pattern that matched the safe. I named the guardianship plan in cool paper. I laid the gala packet on the table. I slid the internal memo to the edge. I pointed to the crisis drill that labeled a mother. I felt heat rise and settle, steady as tea. An expert from a neutral lab handled the Purifier. He wore gloves and moved with ritual care. He opened the housing under a camera and light. He revealed a device nested near the fan. The device was not part of the manufacturer's design. It carried a thin mic and a tiny board. It pushed data through a discrete wireless pathway. It stamped time with precise and unforgiving numbers. The expert traced packet traffic to 2 addresses. One address mapped to the home network. The second mapped to a residence registered to his mother. Dates matched my notebook with eerie grace. Paper passed like a slow tide along the table. The lab report settled in front of the bench. Metal clips held the pages like calm hands. The room's air shifted by a degree. The insurance portal printouts followed, line by line. Consultation, procedure, follow-up, elective status. The month before the wedding sat in blue ink. My pulse moved to a slower, deeper lane. I named the company campus evaluator in the hallway. The map of relationships unspooled without heat or push. Sponsor, scholarship, internal evaluator, guardianship draft. The lines drew themselves with my pen. The ambulance log entered with rain still in its bones. Route closures, facility transfer, time on scene, the ward policy on visitors during an emergency. The record stood like a clear pillar in fog. I offered the recorder file with the safe pattern. The pattern matched the keypad by both rhythm and spacing. I offered photographs of the grill crease in morning light. I offered the technician sticker with the service date. Across from me, pride began to fray at the edges. Words sharpened, then stumbled on their own polish. The narrative tried to grow teeth and lost enamel. Our side kept to the numbers and the grain. I felt my body loosen a fraction without permission. The seat held me like a dock holds a boat. Calm did not feel warm, but it felt exact. I kept my jaw soft and my eyes level. The court focused on the device inside the Purifier. The court focused on the memo that rehearsed distress. The court focused on the addendum that traded harmony for obedience. The court focused on the plan that waited in a safe. I spoke about breath that never belonged to the house. I spoke about a rule that called itself care. I spoke about order that required microphones to survive. I spoke about silence that wore a crown and a wire. The ruling came like a stone into a still pond. Full physical custody to me with sole legal authority. Structured contact for him under professional supervision. No contact or decision role for his mother. Prohibition on surveillance and monitoring devices of any kind. The court ordered an audit of the residence for devices. The court referred the memo and the drill to oversight. The court required counseling that defined coercive control. The court warned that optics have no force in law. I heard my name, my child's name, and the date. Each word landed with quiet gravity and stayed. The clerk stamped documents with a small, decisive thud. The sound marked the end of one weather system. He looked at the table and not at me. Pride sat beside shock and stared at the floor. The room smelled like paper warmed by light. Dust lifted and drifted like pale ash in sun. Outside, the wind moved clouds into orderly lanes. The sky traded tin for a clean, hard blue. I breathed down to the base of my ribs. Air filled the space the house once claimed. I walked to the street and held the canvas bag. The knot pressed into my palm like a seal. Tires whispered over damp pavement and faded. A horn sounded once, distant and human. At home, the Purifier waited like a retired actor. The green ring glowed without meaning or power. The undertone never returned after the lab work. The room felt honest in its ordinary noise. I opened windows and let air touch every wall. The curtains lifted and sighed against the glass. The house smelled like rain, paper, and bread. The smell of lemon oil lowered to a gentler note. I set a small plant on the window ledge. Soil crumbled across my fingertips and left a crescent. I washed my hands and watched water carry darkness away. My shoulders settled into their right height. Weeks moved with the rhythm of real caretaking. Feedings, walks, appointments that honored bodies and truth. Friends returned with warm eyes and useful hands. Laughter sounded unplanned, and no one managed it. I met with a nonprofit at a public library. We sat near a corkboard full of community flyers. We drafted a plan for workshops on digital safety. We drafted a small grant for maternal legal support. A forensic audio engineer offered a session for free. She brought gear that clicked and hummed like small birds. She explained signals in plain words and firm lines. She left behind a checklist printed on thick paper. I spoke to a group of women who wore tired courage. They listened the way anchors listen to current. They took notes with pens that scratched like sparrows. They asked questions with eyes that had seen enough. I told them order without consent is a maze. I told them rules that require microphones will multiply. I told them evidence wants calm hands and daylight. I told them breath belongs to the person who breathes it. On the way home, the air carried a trace of cut grass. A neighbor waved with paint flecks on his sleeve. The sun found the edges of leaves and set them on fire. The world looked simple and true for a moment. I passed a storefront with a framed photograph of a dock. Boards weathered to silver stretched into a quiet lake. The water held light like a bowl holds fruit. The image stopped me the way a bell stops a room. I remembered the feeling of wood under my feet. I remembered how the planks rose to meet my weight. I remembered the way rope smells like salt and work. I remembered the patience of water under storms. At home, the evening settled without performance. The monitor pulsed a soft rhythm near my hand. The walls listened to nothing except wind and pipes. The refrigerator sighed and clicked into a low, honest hum. I placed the court order in a fireproof box. I placed the lab report beside it in a clear sleeve. I placed the memo copies where they can be found. I placed my notebook on the shelf within reach. I brewed tea and watched steam unspool into air. The cup warmed my fingers and eased my chest. The window glass reflected my face and the room. My face looked like a person who has air again. Control met weather and lost. Secrecy met timestamps and lost. Surveillance met daylight and left a map behind. The map shows exits that were always there. If you have lived under a quiet weight, you know. Relief arrives without trumpets and fills the lungs. Justice does not shout, but it changes the light. I can feel that change across the backs of my hands. I lock the door with the key that belongs to me. The click sounded small and perfect in the hall. The house answered with ordinary evening sounds. The rule was gone. The air stayed.